All right, thank you guys for coming. Um, and I'm Ray Fritz. I'm the 13th child of my dad. My dad was a World War II vet, and um, he was actually working at a factory in Rockford, Illinois. That's where we're from, is near Rockford. And when the war broke out, and he was in his 20s, my mom was in high school when the war broke out. And this is actually a place that it turned into an ammunition factory, as many of the factories did during the war. They turned into the war effort. And because he worked in this factory, he didn't have to go to war, and he wasn't. He wasn't thrown into the draft and so forth. And so he was just there, and he met my mom. And they lived in the same town. Rockford's a pretty good sized town. Right now, it's the second largest in Illinois, but back then it was a little bit smaller. And he met her. She lived probably a mile away, and they started kind of having eyes for each other. Dad actually liked the girl, my mom's girlfriend first, and I think he got rejected by her and turned him on. But I don't know the whole story of that. I'm just kind of making that up. Um, but he lived on Rome Avenue in Rockford, Illinois, and as he was working in this factory, the neighbor was in the war, and he came home and he had lost a leg. And when Dad saw that, the neighbor was a father of two children, and it really tugged at Dad's heart because he's seeing, I'm young 20s, I'm healthy, and so he went down and he signed up. And there was a military camp in Rockford called Camp Grant. It's no longer there. It's now an airport. So Dad signed up at Camp Grant. He was dating Mom at that time. They were actually even talking marriage, but he decided, we're not going to get married before I go off to war because I don't want to leave a widow. And so that one of the first pictures over here, I've kind of laid stuff out here as the beginning of the war here, and then going over here, and we'll kind of deal with it in this direction here. But that's a picture of him at Camp Grant. And the crazy thing is he can tell stories of all the people that are in that picture. Dad was able, he said, this was the cook, and this guy lost a leg the first day they were in France. He stepped on a landmine and lost a leg. And Dad would just tell stories about each of those. And those of you who have been in the military, you know what that's like. You remember stories of each one of the guys. And one other just disclaimer also, and again, I say this for the younger kids, this was a different time. This is 1940s, and war is pretty gruesome. And there's some pretty horrible things that Dad saw. And that's why World War II vets especially never talked to anybody. They came home. 16 million men and women fought in World War II just from the United States. And they went and they fought. And when they came back, all they wanted to do was get back in their homes and just live their lives. And so most of them took all this stuff, because a lot of them brought stuff home, and they threw it in the attic, and they just wanted to forget it. And that my dad built a really nice, almost a gun case with glass doors and everything. And all this stuff was just packed in that glass doors. And he never opened it up. And we could see it. We could see all the guns. We could see the Nazi flags. We saw all this stuff, but we had no idea what it was. He never told his stories. And in 1996, I believe it was, Tom Brokaw wrote this book, The Greatest Generation. And what he found out is he kind of told the story of how all these 16 million men brought stuff home, and they just didn't tell their stories to anybody. And so at that time, the World War II vets were dying 1,000 a day when he wrote this book. And what these kids were finding out is they go up in their parents' house and they start clearing it out. And all of a sudden they start finding all this war stuff, and they didn't know nothing about their dads. And so he wrote this book, and he had so many people respond to it that he wrote a second book. It's called The Greatest Generation Speaks Again. And it was people who wrote into him and just said, man, I didn't know this about my parents. I'm so glad you wrote this book, because I forced my dad to tell his stories. And so that kind of prompted me to force my dad to tell his stories. And I'm the youngest kid in the family, so I stayed at home a little bit longer than everybody else. And I just started pressing Dad. I said, Dad, you need to tell these stories. You need to tell these stories. And he finally sat down and shared them with me a couple times, just personally. But my siblings had never heard it. And then when I had kids at that time, and I said, the grandkids, everybody needs to hear this. And one of the stories that I heard is that most World War II vets, because they just wanted to get home, none of them got their medals. And so, because in order to get your medals, you have to stand in the middle of the line. And who wants to stand in another line when your girlfriend or your spouse or your family's waiting for you? And I can just forget that line and go here. So nobody in World War II got their medals. And when I heard that, I was kind of intrigued by that. And so I actually called the Department of Defense, which is based in St. Louis, Missouri. And I found out that because of World War II and because none of these guys got their medals, that one family member from so if you have a family member that served in any war, one direct family member can contact you. Probably have to do it by paper because the military doesn't do anything by internet. But I had to personally write notes to them, and I was able to get Dad's medals. And so he still had his uniform in the closet, hanging in the closet, and he had this uniform hanging in the closet. He had his Eisenhower jacket. That's called an Eisenhower jacket because Dwight Eisenhower kind of made those famous, and the guys kind of wanted those. And they hung in the closets, and when Dad wasn't around, as kids, we'd put them on, and we'd fight the war, we're Dad, and put his helmet on and stuff like that. But I don't remember what year it was, but I actually sent off and I got his medals, and I found out that Dad did not get his medals. He just said that guys didn't want to get their medals. He never said he didn't get his medals. And I found out he did not get his medals. So I got all his medals. I took his uniform. I put it in this, and I presented it to him at Christmas time, and just kind of the surprise to him. And so it was kind of cool. The only thing I couldn't find is this French occupation, because that's a France, showed that he served in France, and I couldn't find that. And he had the original one, but it was all beat up. And some of this stuff had been eaten by mice and stuff like that. And out of all the places, I'm in a gun show in Anoka Ice Arena. And I'm just looking at guns. I'm actually trying to find some parts for these guns. And somebody's got a French braid just laying there in a pile of stuff. I said, and I pretended like I didn't know what it was, Like, what do you want for that? And I go, well, I don't know, $4. And I said, no, I'll give you $4 for it. So I got the French occupation in the Anoka Ice Arena at some gun show, the only medal that Dad didn't have on his uniform. So that was pretty cool. I got the original one, but it's all frayed up and everything. So that kind of started the whole process there. And then I sat down, I talked with Dad. I finally convinced him to talk and on video. And every time, we lived in Arkansas at the time, so we're 12 hours away. We're only making it home once a year. Every time I came home, I talked to him about, would you tell your stories? Would you tell your stories? And every time he said, no, 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 no. And then finally, one time he said yes. And I had the old VCR, but it wasn't charged up enough. So I was able to videotape him for about 2 hours telling his stories. So the same time that I gave him this, I had 2 hours of video of Dad telling his stories, the same stories you'll hear me share here. And I gave it to all my siblings. Every single one of them said, we've never heard any of this. And I said, I know you haven't heard any of this, and that's why I did it. And so that really got me even more intrigued about, finding out more about his stuff and so forth. So kind of become like the family historian, especially with this part of it. And that's part of the reason I actually went to get a history degree at college. That's what my degree is history. And so I love going into the schools and specifically talking about the war itself. So this is his uniform. I put a couple letters here. We have hundreds and hundreds of letters. Every single day he sat down and he wrote a letter to Mom. And every single day Mom sat down and wrote a letter to him while he was off in war. And here's a picture of Mom that he's got here, and here's a picture of Dad. And then the other thing, this is the one thing I found after Dad died. He died in 2013. Is we still continue to find stuff. In fact, I know very little about this pistol here. And this, Dad actually carried this, another Nazi one. It's got swastikas on it and stuff. But he carried this as a sidearm. And that's all I know about it. I don't know that much about it because I just didn't have time to ask him all the stories. But I do know the story behind the Luger that I'll share with you in just a little bit. But I just continued to just kind of press him about his stories. So this, out of all the things that Dad brought home, everything that he's got here, all these medals and all these coins and everything like that, this was by far the thing that he was most proud of. And those of you, it's a wounded duck, military guys. What is a wounded duck? Or is that a term that Dad just used and it's not really a military term? This is honorable discharge, because so many of his friends were not honorably discharged. You know, you do something stupid in the military and stuff like that, and you lose your rank and stuff like that. And so this is by far the most important thing to Dad, is this honorable discharge. And so I kind of put that in a special little package. But another thing that he really saw is really valuable too, and it's interesting, he just put it in a little matchbox here. And he wrote, Dad was a documenter. He loved to write. And so he documented, when we go on vacations and fishing, he would have a whole notebook of things that he just wrote. I mean, just wrote and wrote and wrote. And so a lot of the things have little notes on them here. Now this one's almost illegible because it's so old. But in this little box is a little note and explaining what this is. And on the Rhine River, when they were about ready to march to get into Germany, there was very few Germans left, and Dad was following behind Pat. He was anti-aircraft, and so the gun he shot was the 50 millimeter machine gun, which this is actually some shells from the gun that Dad shot. They're capped there, so they're duds or not loaded or whatever. But so he didn't really see a whole lot of action. He did see a little bit of action, but when they were about ready to cross the Rhine River, there were still German snipers around in different areas. And a German sniper shot at Dad and just missed him. And this bullet came and hit his shoulder strap here and cut him a little bit, but actually ripped his shoulder strap. And it hit a cement wall right behind him. And he picked up the bullet and he put it in this little matchbox and he kept that. So that bullet, 6 inches lower, and Ray Fritz Jr. would not be here. And so it's just an interesting little piece that Dad kept. So those are the two things that, out of all the different things that are out here, that he probably valued the most. And because that one was literally, and his wording was, "We took the guy out." You know, so they took the sniper out pretty quick. So we got his discharge papers. So I've kind of tracked where he's been the whole time. And this is a cool little piece, because this is the mom gave Dad this picture before he got deployed. And this is my mom, and she just wrote him a personal note. I told you they were dating when Dad went off to be trained. He was training for Africa, and by the time he was getting ready to deploy, the Africa campaign was done. And so he came back to the U.S. and to be retrained for Europe. And during that time, he had a 2-week leave, and he just said, "I can't take it. Let's get married." And so during that time, and they got married, went on a short honeymoon. Dad went off to war. Mom went back to high school. She was 17 years old. And so she literally had to finish her senior year at high school. So again, just a different time. And everything that you see over here, you can kind of identify whether it's Dad's or not, because the last 3 numbers of, and I'm really curious to hear from you guys who are in the military too, when we're done here, is if you still do this. But this is a tent stake, and they had pup tents that they slept in. And so you carried your own pup tent, and they were made out of real heavy canvas. When we went camping up in Canada after the war, 10, 20, 30 years afterwards, we took all military stuff, and we probably had 10 pup tents with these stakes. And it's got Dad's number on it. The last 3 numbers of his identification number is 3167. So if you look at a uniform, you look at any piece of equipment over here, you see 3167. That was my dad's personal stuff. Most of it has his number on it. There's a few things. The helmets are not his. And the reason that he doesn't have his own helmet, because that was another line you had to stand in to return your helmet. If I got to stand in another line, or if I can throw that helmet behind the building and not stand in a line and pay the government $20 or whatever it is for a helmet, it gets me home quicker. So a lot of guys just threw them behind the building. Dad stood in line and returned his helmet, but he picked up a couple other guys' helmets that threw them behind there. So the helmets are not his, because we just like souvenirs. You go on vacation, you like souvenirs, and a lot of this stuff is literally stuff he picked up. I think this is interesting here because this is a piece of a hand grenade, an exploded hand grenade, and just little stuff like that you just pick up, on the path. And these are German shells. These are used German shells that Dad picked up, and then these are American shells here. So he picked up a little bit of everything with those. This is ironic because when Dad landed in France, he started in England. He landed in England, and he began to get trained in England, and D-Day had already happened. And so, as I said, he was coming behind Pat, and Pat was kind of sweeping through Europe at that time, and he was anti-aircraft following behind Pat. The Luftwaffe, which is the German military, is pretty much wiped out at that time. So Dad didn't have a whole lot to do. And so as they're coming across France and Germany, he talked a lot about southern Germany. And in southern Germany, and I think the main reason he talked about southern Germany, because they got to stay in castles. And so they literally put their 50 caliber machine gun up on top of the castle, and they would just sit and wait. And no planes are coming by, so they're just kind of hanging out in this cool castle. Well, one of the particular castles had huge gun cases, and just full of gun cases. So some of these guns are not guns of war; they're guns of they're hunting guns. And I'll pick up one here specifically. And this one is really unique. If this was in perfect condition, it'd be worth tens of thousands of dollars, probably $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 gun. But in the condition it's in, it's hardly worthless. It's only worth a couple $100. But this is called a Luger, or not a Luger. It's called a drilling, and it's 3 barrels, and it's a rifle down below and then shotgun above. I think it's like a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge or a 16 gauge or something. But kind of a really unique gun, and that Dad captured, and I'm pretty sure he got this out of that castle. And if it was in perfect condition, it'd have an ivory guard here and stuff like that. But it's dinged, and it's not going to be ever shot again. And so some of these shotguns were probably taken out of that castle. The military guns were guns they're all foreign guns, but they were just discarded. You capture the enemy, and you just take all these guns and you just throw them into piles, and that's where you find all the guns. So Dad was just picking them up, sitting at this castle, and got anything to do, and he just started shipping them home. Was it illegal? Yes, it was illegal. But everybody did it. Everybody wanted souvenirs from the war. He was sending them home. He didn't know if they were going through or not. And he was I said, "How did you get them home?" And he said, I put them in gun crates. They bring the ammo in the crates. And so he had crates, so he would just put some guns in there. And he usually had to take them apart. This is a Kar 98. This is a standard issue German rifle. It's called the Kar 98. And he probably brought about 6 of these home, sent about 6 of these home. And some of them didn't it looks like the wood didn't make it with him, because he probably had to take them apart in order to fit them. The military tried to discourage this by only letting so long of crates go home. And so if you take them apart, you can put them in that smaller crate. There is one Italian gun here that he physically had to cut off the end of it. Where's that? I think it's this one here. Yeah, so he sawed off the end of it. There's about 4 more inches of this barrel that I've got, and he sawed it off in order that he could send it home. And so it's just kind of interesting that he wasn't supposed to send that stuff home, but people do it. And the stuff back there is stuff from other wars that some soldiers have given me. One of the little shawl there is brought home from Iraq. My son's in Iraq. So that's just kind of the stuff that we're looking at here. So here, this is my dad here. This is he was a tech sergeant, so that's the highest rank that he attained to. And here's my dad and mom. I'm not sure if this is before their wedding. I think it might be actually at their wedding. And here he is writing a letter. And notice the ink. You kids don't have any idea what that is. So, but he actually had ink, and he wrote the letters. And every single day he wrote a letter to Mom. And these are a couple of them right there. And we literally just got those. My sister had those, but we just got those, and Jill started transcribing those. Anybody likes to transcribe letters and can read really fancy handwriting? Man, we would love to have other people help us with this. We have hundreds and hundreds of letters. We're a little leery about who we want to do those of, because some of them are pretty personal. This is a newlywed couple, so they're talking about some pretty detailed stuff that it's not going to be public stuff. In fact, Dad honestly he asked my older brother, he said, should I burn these letters? As kids, we snuck into his cedar chest and read those. And we're like, this is that was a timely alarm. But we were like, holy smokes, this is mom and dad. They're talking about this stuff. It's like, whoa, I don't know if we should read these. And but there is some really interesting information there and locations and stuff like that. And that's why we want to transcribe those. But he almost burned all those letters before he passed away because he said, do we really need to have those? And thankfully, my brother didn't really give him an answer, and dad opted to not do that. So Jill is transcribing those right now. And but it's going to take a long time to do that. Yeah.
Was your mother in the military also?
And she was not. No.
Because she was wearing a military.
She had dad's shirt on. Yeah, that was just that's dad's uniform there. So just kind of a cool thing to do, like a girlfriend putting on the football jersey, So so there he is writing his letter. By the way, he was 5'7", 150 pounds, 140 pounds. The ideal soldier in World War II is 5'7", 150. So dad was just underneath that. And I'm not sure how they came up with that. But for whatever reason, the ideal soldier they were looking for was 5'7", 150. Dad was 5'7", 140. So you can see he's pretty small and skinny. So by the time I came along, he was a little bigger than that. So this is the picture that he had in his billfold, and you'll see that there's the billfold that's actually over here. And the billfold is interesting because I didn't know that billfold existed. I heard him talk about it, but that's a leather. It's got his name engraved on it and stuff, by a leather, whatever you call a leathersmith or whatever. But we didn't find that billfold until after Dad passed away, just going through stuff. And so we found it. It had a 1945 quarter in it, which I've got the 1945 quarter, and it had this picture. I didn't know, I'd never seen this. Dad always talked about the picture he brought with him, carried with him everywhere. This was still in that billfold. And so another thing that was in that billfold that's kind of fun is when my kids heard Grandpa tell his story, because I pestered him so much, my kids actually heard his stories a couple times too. But Dad would tell, and the kids were about this age here, and he would turn to them and he would say, when I was in the war, I was a judo instructor, and I learned how to kill people with these two fingers. And I could kill you with these two fingers, but I don't want to show you how. He'd tell the kids that all the time. And we were just thought, he's just elaborating, he's just exaggerating. All of us, guys especially, we like to exaggerate. And we're like, and so that kind of became a joke in my family. And whenever somebody get mad at somebody, like, I could kill you with these two fingers. And we literally said it to each other for a decade. We were just like, my kids still say this. They tell their own kids this. I could kill you with these two fingers. And we just joked around, and Dad was a judo instructor. Yeah. We found this billfold about 10 years after Dad died. It's got a judo instructor card in it. So he was actually a judo instructor. So while some of the things I wouldn't say he elaborated on, but what he just didn't have full information on it. For example, that drilling there, that triple barrel, Dad believed that this gun here, the triple barrel, he believed that this was a German gun. Well, a couple other countries made drillings, but not very many. It's a pretty unique German gun. And all these guns are made by gunsmiths just in little towns. And a lot of them have their names on them, the gunsmith's name and what town they were built in and so forth. And but Dad always told the story that this was carried by the Luftwaffe pilots. So if they crashed, they could use the shotguns to kill animals to live, and they could use the rifle to protect themselves. Well, after I researched that's not true. There may have been some, but that's a pretty heavy gun to be carrying in a plane that you want to be concerned about the weight also. And so there's a few stories that I discovered that Dad didn't really have all the information about, but most of the stories, even the things that were far-fetched, were pretty. I've found out later that they really were true, and the judo story is just a good example. That picture there of his basic training group, as he's pointing out people, he would point out this guy here, and he knew the names of them, and he said, this guy here promised his best friend when he got to Germany, the first dead German he saw, he was going to cut off the ear and send it home. And he did. He actually his friend sent a German ear home. And again, it's just kind of gruesome stuff. And and he pointed out a number of other guys, and some guys that did some really gross things, but some guys that did some real heroic stuff as well. There's also in this case over here, there's some of his personal items here. And included in his personal items is the standard issue glasses. They kind of look like the just sort of old-fashioned glasses. And there's a standard issue Bible. I think that's intriguing that they issued Bibles back then. They also issued cigarettes and they issued chocolate. Dad never smoked, so he traded his cigarettes for other people's chocolate. So he had plenty. He had plenty of chocolate when he was over in the war, and neither did he drink. And so after the war, you see an MP. When you go over there and look, there's an MP patch. When the war ended, all the soldiers were issued an MP pat or MP armband and a billy club, and both those are in his personal items case there. And so they became the military police, just to bring order to Germany and to France and Belgium and all these other countries. And so he kept that stuff. And there's also a star. There's a star in there that mom would hold. There's a little flag that you hang in your home just to show that you've got a veteran. 16 million men. That's more than half the homes in America had a soldier that was off to war. In fact, in Minnesota here is the mom who had the most soldiers. She had 9 sons serving in World War II. And so only one person ever that we know of has ever had 9 stars on their flag. We had 2 sons serving at one time, so we actually had one that had 2 at one point in our lives. So that case there is just a lot of his personal stuff. Another thing that is intriguing is the story that the money tells also. And I became a coin collector when I was in probably grade school or junior high. And most people don't realize, but in 1943, copper was really valuable for the guns and so forth. So if you look at this coin collection, every 1943 penny that you ever find will not be made out of copper. It's made out of steel. They needed all the copper for the bullets. And so they stopped printing and they printed them with steel. And so I just have that sitting out there for that reason. Another thing is I can't pick these up because they'll fall all over. But Dad collected money from Germany from all different stages. From the 1920s. I think there's even 19 teens marks there, and it was the inflation in Germany that kind of led the repercussions of World War I that caused Hitler to rise into power. Because it literally, as the things got more and more expensive, inflation just went crazy. And I have the documents someplace. I don't have them here with me, but just a mark was worth like $1 was worth 10 marks at one point, and then a month later, 1 mark was worth like 200. Or $1 was worth 200 marks, and pretty soon it's like 1 million marks, and then 2 million marks, and 3 million marks, and people were literally taking wheelbarrows full of marks to go to the store to buy a loaf of bread. And so the increase, and Dad's got bills here from all those different stages, which is pretty fascinating. One of the most intriguing on here, if you look closely here, you'll see there's marks here that are printed in blue or green, whatever color that is. And there's also French bills too. And these are bills that were printed by the United States of America probably 2 years before the war ended, because they knew once we defeated these people that their economies are going to be destroyed. And so their marks, their francs, all that was worthless. It was just paper. It was just to help start a fire. It was worth nothing. And so the U.S. basically rebuilt Europe. And this money was what was issued to the soldiers and the people. This is the money that was used during that time of transition after the war. And again, I'm fascinated by the fact that America, and I equate this to our Christian heritage. The Christian heritage of America is to be kind of like the protector, and we were one of the most powerful countries in the world. We had no interest in anything going on in Europe. We didn't need to go to Europe. There was no desire to go to Europe. But yet, when we saw what Hitler was doing, all of a sudden, men like my dad, seeing a friend come home with his leg blown off, signed up, and we went over there in the millions, especially when they attacked Pearl Harbor. And I've read a couple books from the German perspective, because a couple of years ago, in 2019, I got a chance to go to the French shores, the D-Day shores, and some of the places that my dad was at. And these books were written from the German perspective, people who interviewed the Germans that were on D-Day. And two of the questions that the Germans asked, and show a picture here. Well, let me. I'm going to get back to that. Let me finish. Here they are on their wedding day, 1944, right before Dad went off. By the way, this dude was a good preacher too. By the way, Pastor Beaversdorf is his name. So, Lutheran preacher, good preacher. So, Dad loved to fish. Somebody gave him a fish hook in England. He didn't have any line, didn't have a pole or anything, but he found some twine. And when the war was over, he started fishing in the little streams. And the people in Germany were like, "You can't fish. Hitler doesn't allow you to fish." And I don't know why Hitler didn't allow him to fish. And Dad's words were, "We're under a new government. I'm fishing." And every chance he got, he fished. So here he's caught some trout someplace in Germany. And then these pictures here are pictures that Dad came in after D-Day, I don't remember how long it was. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he came in to the D-Day beaches region in Le Havre, France is where he landed. And all the bunkers were evacuated. The Germans just literally, if you're running for your life or you're killed, all your stuff is left there. That's where he got most of these medals and stuff. In fact, some of those medals over there in the second box are probably brand new medals that weren't even worn by Germans yet, because they were still in the PX. And so Dad was just picking them up and, putting them in his pack and bringing them home. And it's kind of interesting because there's an equivalent to our Purple Heart is over there, and there's one that actually has Hitler's picture on it and stuff like that. So there's intriguing German pictures there. But he also, when he went into one of these bunkers that had been evacuated, he picked up and I don't know if he just scooped them up or whatever, but he picked up about 100 pictures that the Germans took. And these are pictures that the Germans took before D-Day as they were in their bunkers. And so I think that's an English plane that they shot down, a British plane, and there's a German soldier sitting on it. And here's some other pictures here, which are kind of intriguing because this is the Germans' perspective. And the Germans were stunned that the Americans were coming over. They really didn't believe the Americans would come over. What interest do they have? The Germans were fighting to get more land. They were going to increase their empire. That's what they were doing. That's the only reason you go to war, is to increase your empire. And so the U.S. has all the land they want, so there's no reason for them to come over. So the very fact the Americans came was kind of a stunning thing for the Germans. And so when they got captured on D-Day, for the few Germans that got captured, they were simply asking the Americans, "Why are you here? What are you doing? You don't need any land." And I love the response of one American. He said, "Here, have a cigarette." I can't even, you don't even understand what's going on. You're just fighting because you're following this evil dictator. And so I can't even explain it to you. Just, here, have a cigarette, sit down and relax. The war's over for you. And that was his response. The other thing, and so these are German pictures that the Germans took. This is the hedgerows that you may have heard about in France. France is covered with hedgerows. And hedgerows are 10, 12 feet tall. That rather than fences, they build hedges that mark off their field. So this is a gun hidden in in one of the hedgerows there, and that's somebody working on that gun emplacement. Here's a better picture of the hedgerows you can see. So this is the French hedgerow, and that's the reason these are crucial, because the Americans couldn't see these from up in the air, and they were going to land gliders on D-Day, and the hedgerows, when they found out that the hedgerows were there, they couldn't land their gliders because they're just landing their gliders on the grass, and they couldn't do that because of the hedgerows. So those hedgerows really played a significant part. This is another downed Allied plane, and these are German soldiers studying the plane because you want to see what the enemy has, and they were able to find out. The Americans did that. Everybody does that. You shoot down an enemy, you try to study their equipment and try to learn more on their equipment. And these are some German soldiers just standing around the plane that they shot down and kind of celebrating. So these are pre-D-Day. There's another German soldier on a plane. that they shot down. Now, this one is fascinating because this is the German soldiers moving their equipment with horses. Another thing that the Germans were shocked by is when they saw the Americans starting to come in on D-Day, one of those German soldiers that was captured, and they just asked the Americans, they said, where are your horses? How are you going to move your equipment? You guys ain't going to get nowhere. You can't move your equipment. But they were so far removed from the modern technology, they were moving all their equipment with horses, where the Americans didn't need horses. We had all automated equipment. And so I thought that was intriguing after I read that book. That picture that Dad captured carried a lot more significance when you see the Germans moving their equipment there. And these are some German soldiers' graves. They're just probably taking pictures of their friends' graves that got killed in the bombing and stuff pre-D-Day. And then here's another soldier. I thought that was interesting because it's an SS soldier. And here's a tank. I don't know what kind of tank that is. I haven't studied my tanks yet, but I assume it's an Allied one because the Germans took that picture. And then here's another plane engine that they're studying. And then these are just interesting pictures because it's daily life. You know, I'm waiting for the attack. I know the Allies are coming over, but I don't know when. So I'm just kind of sightseeing, going to see some of the monuments and things, hanging out with the girls. And that's what they did, you know, as they're waiting. And these next pictures are from Le Tréport, France. This is where the Germans expected the attack to come on D-Day, because that's the shortest distance between England and France, is Le Tréport. But the Americans, incredible. In fact, one of the only successful attacks from water to land was D-Day. I mean, the intricacies of what they did on D-Day is just books and books. There's a reason why there's books and books and books and tons of movies about it, because it was such a fascinating thing. The very fact they didn't come the shortest distance, but they went further south. But these were in Le Tréport. Remember, these are German pictures that the Germans are waiting for the Americans to come over. And so these are some of the pictures in that town. And this, I actually got to go to Le Tréport in 2019. So this is a German picture. This is my picture from 2019. And then interesting, nothing's changed. Looks identical. And there's a picture of the town. You know, other than the town being all blown up, you know, the landscape and stuff looks identical. And then here's the Germans. You see the barbed wire on the beach. You see the soldiers here with their guns and so forth. And this beach, whenever I saw that picture, I always thought this was sand. And when I got there, the beach was covered with these bricks. Or not bricks, these rocks. And the whole beach was rocks like this. So I had to take a couple of those and fight the security at the airport to get those things home. So I thought it was kind of fascinating that it was not a beach. It was rocks. And it's actually hard to walk on. There's another picture. That lighthouse is still there, still standing. You know, it didn't get affected at all because the attack was not here. The attack was 3 hours south. And then here's a picture of the German soldiers walking on that beach. And here's a German soldier and a German descendant. So, but I thought that was kind of intriguing there. So, and then these are just some of the personal. Somehow Dad had a camera. I have no idea how he got a camera. I never asked him that. All these pictures in this little display right here are pictures of Dad. And he had a camera somewhere that he had, and he loved photography. He was a crazy photographer. He wasn't all that good at photography, but he always bought the photography. When I wrestled in high school, he took tons of pictures of me, and then he thought, I bet you these other kids probably want pictures too. So he would take pictures of me, and he would get 2 copies of it and give one to the opponent and one to me. And so when you're standing on the stand, you know, the top 4 guys usually in a tournament got on the stand, he would print 4 pictures. And we'd send them to all these other schools. And all these kids got pictures of their wrestling. They never even met my dad before. But he just loved photography. So it doesn't surprise me that he had these pictures. And probably the most intriguing ones were these pictures here. This is VE Day. And he knew the names of every single one. That's May 8th, 1945. And Dad was in Germany when we declared victory. And he knew the name of every single one of those. I didn't know those pictures existed until after I made this video and saved his stuff. I found the stack of pictures, about 60 pictures, all that size there. And I didn't know they existed. And on the back of them, like Dad did, he recorded what they were and who the people were. And I sat down at the breakfast table and I just kind of like flashcards and I showed them to him. I said, "What's this one? Oh, that's this town. What's this one?" And that's exactly what it said on the back. "What's this one? Oh, that's this guy and this guy." And he named their names. It's exactly what it was, verbatim. 60 pictures. He nailed every single one of them. And there's one of them that's got a wrong date on it. For some reason, he put the wrong date. And we know that because the war was ended by the time he wrote that. But he wrote the wrong date or maybe the wrong month or something like that. But other than that, he remembered every single detail about every one of those pictures. You just don't forget the experiences that he had. And so it's pretty phenomenal. So this is one of those pictures over there, Neustadt, Germany. And here's the guns now being mothballed because the war has ended. So they're just kind of getting rid of all these guns now at this point. This is fascinating because this is a picture in Neustadt, Germany. And the next one here, he's got a number of pictures in Neustadt. I'm not sure why. And this is just how you try to identify the cities because they're all so blown up and everything. And this is on D-Day, or I'm sorry, VE Day. And Dad didn't drink, so he's got a cup of water and he's celebrating. And all his friends are celebrating with cups of water too in these other pictures you've got there. So, but Camp Lucky Strike is one of the places where Dad stayed. Camp Lucky Strike was 60 to 100,000 men lived in this camp in tents, in a tent city. And when I went over to, I got a chance to be in France and Belgium and see some of the places where Dad was at. And I was fascinated because I wanted to see Camp Lucky Strike. 100,000 people, this has got to be a massive area. And remember, the Americans went over there to rescue another group of people that we didn't need to be there. And again, I come back to our Christian heritage with that. That's the reason why we had that desire to do that. So I searched everywhere for Camp Lucky Strike. By the way, Lucky Strike is a cigarette, and all the camps were named after cigarettes. So this was Camp Lucky Strike because guys could relate to the cigarettes because they were all smoking, except for Dad. And so this is some pictures of Camp Lucky Strike. You can see they had the entertainers come, and then here's a camp. They're going home from Lucky Strike also. So they're in line, standing in another line. You can see why these guys wouldn't want to stand in another line. And this is Camp Lucky Strike today. That's what's left of it. What is that? 15 foot by 15 feet. Little monument in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in France. That's all that's left. And again, the reason I took this picture, because I think that's fascinating, because the Americans came over, we did what we needed to do, and we got out of the way. We helped rebuild this country, rebuild the different countries. The only thing that we asked for is that could we have a place to bury our dead? So there's an American cemetery on the D-Day beaches. It's a fascinating, if you're ever over there, it's a fascinating just to see that all these guys that died on D-Day are buried right there next to the beaches that they died on. But we got out of the way and we let them begin to govern, and obviously we even helped them financially to get back on their feet. So pretty amazing documentation of our country, and I think it speaks highly. People, it frustrates me today when people say how horrible and the mistakes that they focus on the mistakes that America has, and we have. The slavery was horrible, but remember, slavery was also ended in America a lot quicker than many other countries. A lot of countries still have slavery. In fact, Africa, there was more slaves owned in Africa by far than what was ever owned in America. And so, anyways, I could go on a little bit about that. But I believe America is one of the greatest countries in the world because of our Christian heritage. We're not a Christian country. You'd never hear me say it's a Christian country, but the documentation and our founding fathers based everything off the scripture. Even those that weren't believers, Benjamin Franklin constantly quoted the scriptures. He knew the Bible, even though he himself was not a believer. So it's pretty fascinating. This is Dad with his Luger that you get a chance to shoot a little bit later if you want to. And the story behind the Luger was, again, Dad was anti-aircraft. And so there was very few things to shoot down. He did see, because at the end of the war, the Germans were just about ready to implement, it's called a Messerschmitt. There's actually a lot of planes that are called Messerschmitts, but the Messerschmitt was a jet fighter. It hadn't been seen yet. And Dad was on top of this castle in southern Germany, and this plane came by, and he put his 55 caliber and tried to shoot it, but it was going so fast he'd never seen anything fly that fast ever. All the guns all the planes that he had studied and seen everything, never seen anything like that before. So he had no idea what it was until after the war. They found out that the Germans were right on the edge of implementing the jets, and so that he did get a chance to see one, but they didn't have it. It could have changed the course of the war if they could have implemented that quicker. This gun he actually shot down. It was a biplane. I don't know if they used biplanes in war or not at that time, but he said it was specifically a biplane that he shot down. And the German soldier, crash landed his plane, and he survived the crash landing. This is at the end of the war. This is at the point where the war is so clearly one-sided that when you capture a German soldier, you don't even take him you just tell him to start walking that direction. Be into enemy lines, and somebody also deal with you back there. So you got to disarm them and just say, start walking that way. So this German soldier had this gun on it was his sidearm, and Dad didn't speak a lick of English or lick of German, and the German didn't speak a lick of English, so they couldn't communicate to each other. And so Dad said, give me your gun. He was the highest in command. He was a sergeant, and so he got the gun. There's a little tool that goes in here. And this little tool, if it was in here, would be all that's needed to take this gun apart, to clean it and fix it up and stuff like that. And that tool was not there. And Dad thought that this German took that out just to spite him. Because if you don't have all the pieces and all the serial numbers it's not as valuable. And every serial number fits with this, but that tool was not there. So he thought the German was just spiting him. So he takes his pistol, he puts it to the dude's head and says, whatever you can communicate. And he says, give me the tool. And he said, obviously the guy was scared out of his wits, and he came to the conclusion he really didn't have that tool. I found that tool at that same gun sale over at Anoka, $1. But Dad thought this gun was going to be worthless without that tool. And so, but they're really pretty, and it doesn't have to match. The serial number doesn't have to match either, so it doesn't affect the value at all. But Dad thought it did, so he literally threatened that dude's life. And then after he realized he didn't have it, he just said, just walk that way. Just go that way, and somebody else will take care of you and so forth. So kind of interesting. This was kind of every single, out of the 16 million men that fought in World War II, every one of them wanted to bring home a German Luger, because that was the prize gun at that time. If you ever watch Band of Brothers, you see a guy who actually captures a German Luger, and he's kind of rubbing it and petting it and just like, man, I got a Luger. And then he accidentally pulls the trigger, shoots himself in the leg, and kills himself. So I don't know if that's true or not, or if that's Hollywood, but it did show the emphasis of how important it was. The Germans would actually booby trap these guns, and they would put them in places, and they would put them full of TNT and stuff. So as soon as it got picked up, it would blow up a group of men. And because they knew how badly the Americans wanted these things. So it's pretty fascinating. Another interesting gun over here too is just this little pistol. It's in the one with the German armband in there. But there's a little single shot 22, and that single shot 22 was sometimes used by the German women at the end of the war, and they would put that that gun in their boot or in their bra. And when they came across an American soldier, they had one shot. Well, 22 has got to be pretty accurate to kill somebody, but they would have one shot at that German or the American soldier to try to kill him. And Dad actually found that gun in a girl's arm who was laying dead. And his response was, I guess the Americans got her first. And so he picked up that gun and he brought that gun home. And so you can see the horror that Dad experienced and the reason why he never wanted to tell these stories. Who wants to relive that? I begged and begged and begged Dad to go back to Germany and France with me, and tracked all his locations where he was at. And he said, I did what I needed to do. I have no desire to go back. And that was kind of the story of all 16 million men. The horrors that they saw there were just beyond comprehension. They just wanted to come home and live in peace. Baby boom began. after these guys came home. 16 million men coming home and haven't seen their girlfriends and their wives. And my sister was born in 1947, I believe, and thus began the baby boom in the Fritz family. So all 13 of us are baby boomers. So this is little Ray. So from 1947 to 1963, we were all born in that baby boom era there. So, and then there's Dad again. So that's just want to point out a couple other pieces here. This I mentioned about the importance of the coins and the story that even this morning, if you were in church, Marco told the story about that guy giving him the dollar bill and used it as a Christian illustration. This is the beginning of your new life, and your first payment. These are dollar bills that Dad had, and one of them he wrote down locations that he was at, where he was stationed. And they're actually silver certificates, which is when these dollar bills were actually worth $1 worth of silver. They're not worth that anymore. So, and then this one has a bunch of his buddies. And I don't know if it was at the end of the war or when, but they just all signed a dollar bill and they kept it so they'd remember each other. And I thought it was intriguing towards the end of Dad's life. I thought, how fun would it be to look up some of these friends and see if I could find some of them. And so probably about 2010, 2012, something like that. Dad passed away in 2013. I found one of these dudes by just going on the military sites and stuff. I found one that lived in Minnesota. And I thought, how cool would that be to find one of Dad's old buddies? They're 90 years old and get them together. And so I started researching, finding out a little bit more, found out he lived, I don't remember where it was at, and started reading more and more about him. Then I came across the last thing I read was he's buried in Fort Snelling. And my heart just kind of sunk. I didn't look it up anymore from his buddies. And so never connected Dad with any of his buddies. So these other, just another interesting piece that I told you, the pennies were made out of steel. And the nickels, you can still find these, by the way, kids. You want to start a coin collection, you can still find these. This nickel's worth about $2.50, and it's 1944, because they needed the nickel for the tanks and the armor and stuff. And so they made the nickels out of silver for about 3 or 4 years during the war. So this is a silver nickel. Any nickel that's got the mint mark on the back there, see that big mint mark there? That's silver, and it's worth about 20 times more than 5 cents. So it's well worth it. Every once in a while, you still find them in your change. So, but that's just interesting. Again, you see these. And then there's someplace, here's, I don't know where I got some tokens here someplace, but I think they're over there. At the end of the war, I found these after Dad passed away, so I don't know the story behind them, but he's got a lot of beer tokens from different towns in Germany. And I kind of think, I don't know, my own hypothesis is that after the war, the Germans were so thrilled that the Americans they were just giving them tokens for beer. And these brew houses is what they're called. And so he's got all these, and Dad didn't drink. So he's probably just sticking these things in his pockets, another souvenir. And so Jill and I are actually planning for our 40th wedding anniversary next year. We're planning on doing the trip that I had hoped to do like in 2010 with Dad, to take him to all the places he was at, because I have his discharge papers. I got all the locations where he was at. I know every single place where he was at. And we want to go see some of those places, and maybe even see if some of the places that are behind him in these pictures still exist today. And maybe we'll see if they take the brew house tokens. I don't know. So, just kind of fascinating. I've always wanted to do that, and I literally had 3 days in France and Belgium in 2019, just as I was going on a mission trip to Africa, and I got 3-day layover, and I just rented a car, and I didn't sleep. I just drove from one place to another, and I slept in the car for a couple hours in McDonald's parking lot, and just recorded stuff and wrote things down. And then I drove to some more places just to see the different places that Dad was at. So I was able to see some of the places, but I never got outside of France. So I haven't been to Germany and stuff yet to see the places that he was at. But we're hoping to retrace his steps, and probably looks significantly different, just like Camp Lucky Strike looks significantly different. But kind of fun story that we're looking forward. He also and again, this is stuff I found after he passed away, but he's got German coins, he's got French coins, he's got Swedish coins, he even has Mexico coins. I have no idea where he picked up a Mexico coin, but he's getting, and this is just some of the coins that he got, but we found these after he passed away, just digging through his stuff, and a lot of them are either 1940s or pre-1940s coins that he picked up someplace along the path. This is an interesting little piece too. I mean, who brings a typewriter home from the war? Out of all the things you can collect from the war, who in the world picks up a typewriter? And this is a French typewriter, and it's a Corona, so it's made in the United States, and it's French because the letters are different up here in the French one. It's called an Azert because it's Azert. Our letters are different up there. And so it's an Azert, or a French typewriter, and Dad captured this in a German bunker. So it's a French typewriter made in the United States being used by the Germans. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And he just picked that up and brought it home. So it kind of a unique capture of the war. Some of these other things, these are the ration books because you rationed your food. These are not my dad's. I picked these up someplace else. But you had to have ration. You were only rationed so much food so that there was enough food to feed the troops that were. And again, we think of the Christian culture that we grew up in and that we know. Even the wars that are going on today, when you watch the Russians in Ukraine, they have no supply line. And what that means is that they're sending guys off to war with no support. Anybody ever seen the show MASH? One of the most popular TV shows. MASH is a supply line. MASH is protecting those soldiers. They're being, every once in a while in MASH, they get bombed in Korea because they're that close to the front line. America started doing that, having men to secure it so the men don't pass away when they get shot and they get injured, like Marco did, who you heard this morning. You know, Marco probably survived because of that supply line and because of that military, because of that concern we had for every soldier. The Russians don't do that even today. That's why nobody wants to fight for Russia. And they're begging, they're taking guys out of prison and forcing them to go fight in Ukraine. Because if they get shot and they can't walk, they may get eaten by a wild pig. Nobody's going to protect them. They're just they're sitting ducks. And again, I think that's another good another good illustration of just the importance of every human being. You know, Americans have a much greater value towards humans than some of these other countries. So some of the other things here, there's some of the T-shirts he got from the war. Dad's mistake he made when he was in England. Oh, here's the brew house things here. He had some friends that talked him in to go to a burlesque show, and I don't think he realized what he was doing. And but he went there and he regretted that, and he talked a lot about it. In fact, I've even thought about throwing that thing away, but I thought that's kind of the story. So I've just held on to it. But he talked about, you know, because he was married at that point, and he's like, why am I doing this? You know, and he regretted that. He regretted doing that. I found this is a P-38 airplane, and when Dad was stationed in, and it was really not a very effective plane, but when he was stationed in California and he was training for the war, and just like every soldier, they're invincible. You know, nobody can shoot me, nobody can take me down. Dad had that mentality also. And one day the sergeant came in and to the group, and he said, hey, we had a plane that crashed and we need people to clean up the plane. And if you're willing to clean up the plane, we'll give you double rations when you go through the chow line. Well, who doesn't want to eat double the amount of food? So Dad volunteered really quick. They gave them each a 5-gallon bucket, and their job was to go pick up the body parts. And that was the first time that Dad saw death. And that's when war became a reality. These were American soldiers that crashed on the base in California, and that was the first time he saw death. And all of a sudden, war became real to him. And it was pretty, you know, he talked a lot about that. So I actually found a little model of a P-38, because in this little memory box here, there's also a piece of that P-38, that little piece of metal. He stuck that in his pocket and he kept it just to remember. And he documented that too. And he said, this was the P-38. that crashed in California at Camp Han, I think it was. I can't remember. He's got T-shirts from every single camp he was at. But that was really eye-opening to him, and that kind of changed his whole perspective of what we're doing and how dangerous this mission actually is that we signed up for. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There's a couple other things. Oh, this is the German castle. Again, we come back to that southern German castle. And later on, as I began to study the world wars, and I found out that after Germany lost in World War I, they still honored their soldiers, and especially those generals and stuff that were higher up. And they honored them by giving them castles in southern Germany, which was pretty intriguing. So when Dad's talking about staying in a German castle with his gun up on the roof and then collecting all these guns and sending them home, and that's where he got these swords too. There's 2 swords that are identical, except for this one has writing on it here, engraving on it. And as I began to research this is not a World War II piece, this is World War I. And so this is a sword from World War I, which makes me think, was that castle from one of the war heroes from World War I. So I think that was just kind of intriguing. Dad didn't know. And another thing he did, another mistake that Dad did, is these things were all beat up and all scratched up and stuff. And Dad, they don't look very good. I'm going to spray paint them. And so you don't spray paint antiques. And so this looks nice and cool and black, but that's not the way it looked when he got it. And I was stunned when I came home and he had spray paint. I'd seen this a number of times. When I came home, I'm like, what did you do to that? It's got drips on it and everything. Oh, I spray painted it. I wanted it to look better. Dad, don't spray paint anything else. So, and then these are bayonets. These are bayonets. This goes on the Car 98. So it's this one's a little bit of a dress one. This is the Car 98, so it would go on one of these rifles here. And this is for like parades and stuff like that. It's a little bit more pretty. But then the other ones, the ones that you're actually using in war, like this is a Car 98 one also. And some of these other ones are different lengths for different guns and stuff like that. This one here is interesting because this one goes on an Italian gun that he got. This is the one that he had to cut because it's so long. And Dad used to make fun of the Italian soldiers, kind of like, who's Marines here? Raise your, if anybody Marines? Anybody Army? Army, we got a couple Army. Any other branches here? So Army and Marine, Navy, okay. How come the Navy doesn't fight with the Marines and Army? It seems like the Army and the Marines are the ones who are fighting all the time. And just like the Army and Marines kind of argue about who's the best and stuff like that, Dad used to make fun of the Italian soldiers. And I don't know if the Italians weren't very good Army or what, but the Italians had longer guns and longer bayonets, he said, because they didn't want to get too close to people. And that was his wording. I don't know if that's legit or not, but I think it'd definitely be a little bit harder to fight hand-to-hand combat with that longer one rather than the shorter one. But I just thought that was interesting. Again, that's my dad's perspective, whether that's true or not. This is a really nice, my brother put this in a shadow box. This is a really nice Car 98 bayonet, and this one's got etching in it and stuff, and this would be only worn for parades and stuff like that. This would not be used in battle. So the shoulder boards here, these are called shoulder boards, and I told you it's a different time in World War II, and these are just medals. A lot of these medals he got out of some of the bunkers. They probably weren't even being worn, but these shoulder boards were literally taken off of dead Germans. And you notice there's only one of each one of them. And because out of honor of the dead, they had to identify the body. And so he would only take one shoulder board, and he just kind of collected shoulder boards. And these are, when I say shoulder boards, they go up here. And so if you watch Hogan's Heroes, you can see them on there and stuff. And then some of these other ones are ones that were on their chest and stuff like that. And Dad's story was, this is one of the stories that I found out was not totally true, but the Americans joked around about how the Germans had medals for everything. They just loved their medals, that made themselves look more important and stuff like that. And the particular medal here, it's actually got a bullet on it, spent bullet on it. And Dad's story was that these bullets were a guy who was injured and then they would keep the bullet, just like Dad has his bullet, and they would wear that bullet the rest of the war. And the fact is, the Germans actually printed these, and they just gave them to them. And I'm not sure what the significance of them was, but that's not really probably not a bullet that actually shot a German soldier. And these little bands here and stuff. One of them is the what's the highest rank or the highest award? Can't remember what it is, but it actually goes into their little shirt here. And these little things were used to show. I can't remember what it's called. I'm drawing a blank here. Yeah, it's kind of like the Medal of Honor, but it's something. There's a different name for it, and it's a real important. It's kind of like our Purple Heart, but it's a real important medal that the Germans had. But Dad, just like he laughed at the Italians, he also laughed at the Germans because they just had medals for everything. You know, you're breathing today. Hey, here's a medal. So. And then most of these here too are brand new medals. This one actually has the bag that it came in, so it hadn't even been issued yet. And this belt buckle is fascinating too. I can't remember what it says. It's in German. It's similar to "In God We Trust" that we have in America. And it's interesting how the Germans were reaching out to God also. But millions, almost every German soldier wore that belt buckle. They printed them by the millions. And so they all wore that same belt buckle, and certain ones are for certain awards and that. Most of these were probably not even issued. He picked up in the bunker or in the PX of the places that he went. So, and then there's that little pistol. This little button right down here, it's got a swastika on it. That's called a German Youth Medal. And they would give that to children to just kind of indoctrinate them into the Nazi party and make them proud. You know, little kids like these guys back here, they would give them that medal just to be, you know, become proud of your America or your country. And I actually read. I've always been intrigued by Hitler's book Mein Kampf, because it kind of laid out his plan. And I actually read it, and it's a patriotic book is what it is. It's a patriotic book from a guy that went haywire. And so he took his patriotism a little bit too far, not a little bit, way too far. But if you read Mein Kampf, you would just be thinking, this guy's just proud of his country. It's not that big of a deal. But he took it to another level. And all of a sudden, the Aryan race is much more superior. You may not realize this, but that swastika you see here, that is not even allowed in Germany anymore. It's not allowed to be anywhere in Germany. I've done this presentation to students and had some German foreign exchange students in the room, and they were looking around, are we going to get arrested? Are we going to get in trouble? I mean, they were shocked to see Nazi swastikas around. That swastika was one of our divisions, is the 45th Infantry Division in World War II. That was their armband, was a swastika. And so that symbol didn't become evil until Hitler came on the scene. And it was the 45th Infantry Division that ended up changing that halfway through the war in 1945. They changed their insignia on their arm to a Thunderbird, is what it is now. So there's American soldiers in World War II fighting with the swastika on their shoulder. So that symbol didn't mean what it meant pre-war as it did at the end of the war. So I think that's kind of fascinating too. If you're ever down in Oklahoma City, go to the 45th Infantry Museum. It's phenomenal. And they're the ones who took over Hitler's what is it called? Bird's Nest and Eagle's Nest is Eagle's Nest, and they took over his bunker. All his personal items are in that Oklahoma City 45th Infantry. So those are the dudes that captured it all. But they also had the swastika on their armband throughout most of the war. So kind of fascinating, even the symbols and the symbols that don't mean a whole lot today, but mean a lot in the past. So that's kind of the stuff. This I believe this is a launching grenade, a German grenade that goes they can point it from the rifles. One other thing I wanted to show you kids up here. I'm telling you, you just bring home whatever souvenirs you can find. But this one has always been intriguing. And this is how my dad presented it to us as kids, is he would say, this is a grenade. And he said the way these things work is it's got a little handle on it, so you push that handle down and you pull that pin out, and then as soon as you release this, it's got 3 seconds before it blows up. So if you would take that, that's how Dad presented it to us. I don't present that way in the schools, but here I can do that. So it's been disarmed, obviously, and you can't tell it's been disarmed, which is interesting because you can still get these. You can get these at Army Navy surplus stores, but they're usually drilled out in the bottom. And because Dad got this before they started drilling them out, you can still kind of freak out little kids. So it's kind of fun to freak out little kids. So hopefully I don't get in trouble for that. So sorry, Mom and Dad. So, but again, you just bringing home a little bit of everything there. So, all right. I don't know how we're doing time-wise. I haven't even been watching the time. Questions? I guess we're actually just about out of time here. But any questions or thoughts or comments? Yeah. I literally just bought another gun safe because it's just these Rubbermaids. But like the Nazi flags, that's so unique. I need to put those in a fireproof safe. And so I literally just bought another safe just the other day and to put some of this stuff in. But it's just in the Rubbermaids. And Dad had it just thrown into these cabinets. And so that's why some of them are yellowed. Some of them have mice. Some of the things aren't in here because they were eaten by mice. Just that were in our house when we were kids. So we lived next to a cornfield, so you can't keep the mice out of the house. And yeah. So and I do have a gun case to put all this stuff. So, but then I don't the metals and things like that. I'm not able to fit into the gun case right now. But I literally just bought one. So when I bring it back home, we're going to go into that new gun safe. So, yeah.
Yes. How long did your dad serve in the military?
Yep. It says right over here. It says October 1942 to November 45 is when he got out.
When did he spend over there?
About 18 months he spent in I say Europe. It wasn't totally all. It was in France or England, France, and Germany. I think are the only 3 places. I don't think he went. He's really close to Belgium. Le Havre is where he came in, and that's where the port was and stuff like that. But yeah, England, France, and Germany is where he was at. So
I forgot. Did you mention how old he was when he enlisted?
21. So he's 24 years old when he enlisted. So he was, he wasn't an 18-year-old kid. He wasn't fresh out of high school. He had been working for a while. He was working in this factory, and he didn't, like I said, he didn't need to sign up. Couldn't be drafted because he was working in a munition factory. So, yeah, so he was 24, Mom was 27, or Mom was 17, I mean, when they got married. So. Any other questions? The biggest thing, I mean, the thing that I love to just emphasize is just I feel like our Christian heritage has been instrumental. The heritage of the stability of America for 248 years now, and our Constitution is one of the longest living documents in history. And I think it's because of our Christian heritage. It's not because we're a Christian nation, but it's because we've chosen to build this country on Christian principles. For example, of protecting your soldiers, as they go into the front. And we still do that today. And other countries don't do that. And that's why that's why they're not as successful, and that's why they're not. And so I think, God's going to bless America as long as we stay focused on Him. But, we're looking pretty bleak right now. And it doesn't matter who is elected president. That's not the president's responsibility to keep us focused. We, as Christians, need to be sharing the gospel and seeing people's lives transform from the inside out. That's the only hope we have as a country. So I know when I was speaking at one of the schools, I used to take that's a 7-foot Nazi flag. And I would hang it from the wall. And some of the self-righteous kids would come in there, and they were like, "We're not coming in here. There's a Nazi flag in here. There's a Nazi flag in here." And I love what the teacher said. It was Mr. Nelson at Meadow Creek, because Linda teaches at Meadow Creek. or legacy, I mean. And he just kind of got in those kids' faces. He said, if Ray's dad would not have captured that flag, that would be hanging from our flagpole. And he said, but the very fact that we have this flag and the American flag is hanging from the flagpole speaks volumes. And I thought that was a great response. And Mr. Nelson is about as emotional as you can get. So he was yelling at that kid. So if you guys notice something at the flag over here that I intentionally put up here, this is not something Dad had, but there's actually two flags there. I got a small one and a big one. If you look at those, you'd notice something different if you're really detail oriented. But what do you see? What do you see on it? It's what?
It's not 50 stars.
Right. There's not 50 stars on there. And that's the flag that they would have been flying in World War II, because the last two states didn't come into being until 59. So Alaska and Hawaii are not on there yet. And so that's a 48-star flag. And found those at estate sales, and I thought that'd be kind of a cool addition to my collection. So, and now I have too many 48-star flags. They're actually pretty easy to find. So, oh yeah, you guys speak up, bud. What? Yeah, I did not hear. Yeah, I didn't tell this part of it. Dad, because of his experience in World War II, were so horrible. There's 9 boys in our family, 9 boys and 4 girls. And he said that none of my children, if they ever institute the draft, we will move to Canada. He said, none of my sons are going to go through what I went through. And so they weren't drafting girls. And so when Vietnam broke out, my 2 oldest brothers were capable of being, or they were going to be drafted. And I don't know how this all panned out, because I've talked to those 2 brothers. And their story was a little bit different than what Dad said, but they enlisted in the National Guard, which at that time they were not being deployed. Now the National Guard can get deployed, but back then, so my 2 brothers served in the National Guard, but it was kind of with Dad kicking and screaming because he just wanted nothing. Since then, though, some of his grandsons, a lot of his grandsons have served. My 3 boys have all served, and one of them was served in Iraq. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one more. Is the other handgun P38?
You tell me. I don't know. The guys over here knew, because I brought it to a gunsmith this week just to make sure it was working. So this one's not working. It's got a spring missing in here, so we're not. I was hoping we'd be able to shoot this one, but there's a spring that doesn't eject, and it's probably a $20 part. But so you tell me what it is. I mean, you look at it and you tell me. The guys over there told me, but I didn't write it down, so I need to write it down. Dad didn't tell me much about this gun, but what he did tell me is he liked this one a lot better than the Luger, and so he actually carried this as his sidearm after he captured it. If you look really, really close, you can see little swastikas on it too. And same with the Luger, you can see little swastikas, as well as these this Car 98 too. You got to look really close because they're really small stamps on there. This is actually a sniper rifle, and I couldn't find this one was like these here. It didn't have the stock on it, and lo and behold, at the Anoka Armor or the Anoka Ice Arena, I found a stock that this baby just dropped right into, and it doesn't have the top pieces on it, so it's still missing some pieces. And so I've been deer hunting with this. I told my wife that if I ever get a buck with it, I'm retiring it. A couple years ago, I got a buck with it. So now this hangs on the buck antlers in my house. So never to be shot again. But it's got a scope on it here, and all the scopes were handmade. If this is another gun that if it was all in place, it would be worth tons of money. But in the condition it's in, you can probably buy them for $100, $200, $300, something like that. But I have gotten deer with this baby. So, but it's retired now because I finally got my buck with it. So it's hanging on the 6-point antlers. So. But yeah, so anyway, it's just I can't remember. That wasn't the question. I remember what the question was about. The what?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So just the whole idea that they're Nazi guns, and to be out in the woods in Minnesota with this gun with swastikas on it is kind of weird. So, any other questions or thoughts? Thank you guys. Appreciate you coming, and it's